Hello everybody and welcome to The Forge. It is great to have you join us at this time. I'm Emily, I oversee our kids' work here at The Forge, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to our online service. Now there's no service at Debenham, but we are really glad that you are joining in person online. Now if you're joining in a group or with friends, then well done, that's fantastic. We're in part 3 of our series, Dress to Impress, where we're taking a look at what we wear, not in terms of our wardrobe, though if you're wearing a red t-shirt, great, but in terms of our outlook. And today we've got Steve speaking on what I think is one of the hardest topics, the one that every single one of us struggles with, but the one with the most power to change our life and outlook. So let's head straight to Steve.
Imagine this, if you had £86,400 in your account and someone stole £10 from you, would you be so upset and then throw the remaining £86,390 away in the hope of getting back at that person? Or would you move on and live? I mean, you'd move on and live. Now, we all have 86,400 seconds each day. So don't let someone's negative 10 seconds ruin the remaining 86,390. Don't sweat the small stuff. Life is bigger than that. This has been posted on social media recently, and I thought that's really clever. And it really makes sense, but boy, is it hard to do. You see, everyone watching today will have experienced hurt at some point, and for some, it will have been a huge trauma. So today may well be quite tough. And we all know that we live in a hurting world, and that's normal, that's natural. But what we're looking at today, forgiveness, is a response that isn't normal, but it's supernatural. Welcome to The Forge online today. We are continuing our series called Dress to Impress, based on 3 verses written by a man called Paul. Paul was an enemy of the early church until he encountered Jesus. He was the author of a number of the letters that you find in the New Testament. And he faced beatings, imprisonment, hostility, betrayal. He knew what it was like to be hurt by others. And he penned these words to a bunch of Jesus followers in Colossae called the Colossian church. And he wrote this. He said, "So, chosen by God for this new life of love." In other words, becoming a follower of Jesus involves a change of direction, a change of focus, a change in how we live and love. And he says, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. And so here are some characteristics and attitudes that we can choose to put on each morning when we wake, just like we can choose to put whatever clothes on for each day. And he goes on to list those characteristics. He says compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline, even-tempered, content with second place. And then he comes to our theme for today, and he says this: quick to forgive an offence, forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. So why does he highlight forgiveness as being so important? Well, it's because unforgiveness is destructive and damaging and affects so many people negatively. And the one who suffers most is nearly always the one who isn't able to forgive. Because unforgiveness causes or ends relationships, it causes division, and it leads to a prison of bitterness and hostility. Whereas forgiveness is creative, it's giving, it's healing, it's freeing, it's restorative. Forgiveness changes things. Forgiveness is replacing ill will with goodwill. And it's no coincidence that the word forgive contains the word give. Not only is it something that we're invited to give to others, but the ability to forgive is given to us from God himself. Now, before we go any further, I want to highlight that forgiving is actually a very hard concept to grasp. We think we've got it, but then like a bar of soap in the shower, it kind of slips away from us. And as it's so hard to grasp, I guess it's important to know what forgiveness isn't. Forgiveness isn't a cure for all painful situations. It isn't diminishing the level of hurt that took place. Nor is it saying that what's happened is okay and that it doesn't matter. And it's not letting someone off the hook or pretending everything is all right. And neither is forgiveness automatic reconciliation. There are some situations where reconciliation should never take place. A lady called Sue Atkinson, in her book, Struggling to Forgive, Moving On from Trauma, says this. She says, forgiveness can be complex. It's helpful to see forgiveness as an umbrella term for lots of different aspects to it. And then she says, but we can recognize it when we see it. You see, to forgive those who have caused huge trauma of rape, of murder, of physical, emotional or sexual abuse is just a different level and requires so much more processing and work than the day-to-day hurts that cause irritation and some emotional hurt. Things like a sharp word or poor response from a colleague, or unfair treatment from the boss, or feeling betrayed by someone that we trust. As I've been preparing this talk, I've listened to a John Ortberg podcast called Become New. It's brilliant. And in the podcast, he introduces his listeners to Everett Worthington, a professor of psychology and the guru of research into forgiveness. Now, when Everett started practicing psychology, where he focused all his time on was couple counselling. And he discovered that forgiveness became the major issue in almost every couple that he counselled. So he started to do some research on forgiveness and the process that helps people to forgive. And he worked with other thinkers and researchers too. And after 7 years of research, something happened that stopped him in his tracks. On New Year's Eve, a man broke into his mother's house thinking it was empty. There was no car in the drive because she didn't drive, and she'd gone to bed early and so all the lights were off. It looked like the house was empty. But while he was in the house, she awoke and confronted the intruder, who was holding a crowbar at the time. And he used the crowbar to bludgeon her to death. And Everett said that when the police had informed him of what had happened, he was so full of rage that he remembers pointing to the baseball bat in the room and saying he wished whoever had killed his mum was here so that he could use the bat to hit him across the head and kill him. And for hours, he said, hours into the night, he raged until he decided he needed to do something a bit more productive. And so he started to write her eulogy. And he said that it then struck him that his life for the past 7 years had been around researching forgiveness. And here he was, a psychologist, a researcher, a follower of Jesus, who wanted to take revenge and kill the intruder and hadn't had one moment's thought about forgiveness. So he talks about starting a journey of forgiveness, putting into practice the model that he'd been working on. And you know what? Now he's a man who is free from anger, who's learnt to forgive and who still feels the pain of his loss, but has 86,400 seconds each day to enjoy rather than live with hatred and bitterness towards the intruder. As I listened to that story, I kept wondering, what was the model? What's the process of forgiveness that he'd worked on and used? And eventually he explained it using the acronym called REACH. He talked about this being a route to experiencing emotional forgiveness, the part we all struggle with at times, to feel like forgiving or to feel free again. And he also said that research overwhelmingly shows that the number one factor when it comes to forgiving is the time you put in on working at forgiveness. We can all learn to forgive, but it takes work, hard work, and time. And I just want to say that if you've faced a huge trauma, can I suggest that you don't start with that when considering this practice? Look more at the smaller day-to-day hurts that we face when someone is rude to us or talks behind our backs or does something that really offends us. Because if you've experienced trauma, the required forgiveness is huge. And so it's wise to get support and help from therapists. That's what I'm about to share still applies, but there is no quick fix. But once we get used to forgiving the smaller stuff, the bigger stuff can become more manageable to deal with. So Everett talked through what each letter represented, and this made a lot of sense to me, but here's the warning: it is hard. He said the R is for recall the hurt. And by that, he doesn't mean going back over it to prove that you're right and that they're wrong, or to ruminate on the pain and let it stew. No, he speaks about going back objectively to review the events, the intentions, the roles that each person involved took, and to view it in terms of empathy towards the other person. You know, one of the amazing examples of forgiveness is found in the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. You know, he was the favourite son of Jacob, and his brothers hated him and threw him in a pit and then sold him to slavery. I mean, weren't those brothers horrible? But to recall the hurt and look objectively at what happened, we read this. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks, and he worked for his half-brothers. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Now, how would that make you feel, having a younger half-brother telling tales on you and dropping you in it with dad? The next verse goes on to say this: Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob gave a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. So to top it all, he then goes on to what sounds like a narcissistic dream. You know, one night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Because in his dream, the whole family were bowing down to him. So in the space of 4 verses, Joseph winds his brothers up big time. Put yourself in their shoes. How are you feeling towards Joseph now? How do you view the brothers? I mean, what they did was awful. It was horrendous. But now you get a wider perspective and maybe some empathy for the brothers. The E stands for empathy. It isn't just to justify in any way what the other person did, but the idea is to try and understand how they might have been thinking. You know, often we make up stories of why they've behaved in a certain way. You know, they've never liked me, when that might not be the case at all. So it's to put ourselves in their position and to empathise with them. A couple of weeks ago, Sarah and I arrived home to find that our dog, Poppy, had had an unexpected haircut. She looked like she'd stuck her face in a pencil sharpener. It was obvious that James, our lodger, had done it, as the scissors were still out in the kitchen, and both Sarah and I thought James had just had a go at dog grooming and had not done it very well. We were a little peeved at James doing this. So when he came home, he explained that Poppy had run through some long grass whilst he was looking after her, and she was covered in those sticky burrs. And he managed to get most of them off her body, but he couldn't remove them from her face, so he'd had to cut the fur to smarten her up. And he was so worried that we'd be cross. But both Sarah and I just realised we had jumped to the wrong conclusions and that we weren't concerned at all. The A stands for altruistic gift of forgiveness. Now, altruism is the unselfish concern for others. So forgiveness is altruistic in that the person or the people who have hurt us don't deserve to be forgiven. We give this undeserved gift in the light of the forgiveness that we've experienced through our lives from our parents, our friends, our colleagues, our families, and from God who's made forgiveness possible through Jesus. You know, years after Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers, he becomes prime minister and took responsibility for storing and selling grain during the famine. His brothers came to buy grain from him in Egypt, and they didn't recognize him, but he did them. And after a while, he revealed who he was to them, and they were terrified. They thought they were going to be killed. But Joseph's response was incredible. It was altruistic in that he gave them the gift of forgiveness. It wasn't deserved. They'd done nothing to try and put the situation right, yet he forgave them. And after saying that he forgave them, it says this: then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. And after that, they began to talk freely with him. The C stands for commit to it. Often it's helpful to tell someone or to write a note to yourself saying, I forgave so-and-so on such and such a day. The reason it's important to commit to it, to mark it in some way, is because you can hold on if and when you start to doubt, when you don't feel very forgiving. And this is why the H stands for hold on when it's hard. It's not surprising that we'll struggle, that there will be triggers that bring back those hurt emotions. Sometimes it's certain places or it's people's responses. It's even smells that can be a trigger. So commit to forgiving and holding on to that forgiveness. Joseph did great in that when he forgave his brothers, their dad, Jacob, was still alive. And when Jacob died, the brothers panicked, thinking Joseph would now get his revenge. But Joseph was so committed and he held on to that forgiveness. The writer in Genesis says this, but Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so that I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. See, Joseph didn't hold the hurt and pain that they'd caused against him. So recall the hurt, empathize, altruistic gift of forgiveness, commit to it, and hold on even when it's hard. I love the Message version of these verses, but the original Greek doesn't include the quick element to forgiveness, because it's less about speed and it concentrates more on learning to forgive fully. Actually, sometimes that does take time, lots of it. But choosing to put on and dress in God's garment of forgiveness means that we go into each day ready to not take things too personally, but to be empathetic towards others, to put ourselves in their shoes, to be as quick as we can to give the gift of forgiveness before bitterness and resentment shows up. So, chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. Forgiveness is a miracle. It's supernatural. It's a gift from God to us and for us to share. And there's a motto that sometimes is used in the 12-step communities, which goes like this: I can't, God can, I think I'll let him. And that's so true when it comes to forgiveness. God, I can't, but you can. I think I'll let you. And finally, just keep this in mind. What's the most famous symbol in the world? One that's found in churches, on graves, and adorns more jewellery than any other symbol. The cross began as a symbol of hatred, hostility, humiliation, and dominance, and it became a symbol of forgiveness. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus could take a means of execution and turn it into a thing of beauty. That's the power, the creative power, the miraculous power when forgiveness comes into play. And the creative power of God comes back into the world, and it can happen through your life and my life today as we experience his complete forgiveness, and then we pass that on to others. Forgive as the Master forgave you. Or, as Jesus taught us to pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive. Hey, let me pray for us. Father, thank you for the supernatural power of forgiveness, for the healing and freeing power of this action. Thank you that there is an alternative to revenge and hatred, which only ever just leads to destruction. But God, it is so hard to forgive. So please, by your Spirit, would you empower us to put on the garment of forgiveness every day, to show empathy, to offer forgiveness freely, and to commit to it. And may we do this not in our own strength, but in the knowledge that you have forgiven us completely. Lord, forgive us our debts as we forgive. In Jesus' name, amen.
When all I see is the battle, You see the victory. When all I see is the mountain, you see the mountain move. And then as I walk through the shadows, your love surrounds me. There's nothing to fear now, for I am safe with you. So when I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. And if you are for me, who can be against me? Because Jesus, there's nothing impossible for you. When all I see are the ashes, you see the beauty. When all I see is the cross, God, you see the empty tomb. So when I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. Every fear I'll lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you. An almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. An almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God. So when I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs to you, and every fear I'll lay at your feet. I'll sing through the night. Oh God, the battle belongs to you.
Well, there's lots to think about, and some of you, it might feel really tough for you because forgiveness isn't easy. If you're with your group or even at home with family or perhaps just a coffee, here are some questions to consider. Why is forgiveness great in theory but so hard to clothe ourselves in on a daily basis? Number 2, how is it possible to have empathy for the person who has hurt us? Number 3, how does the cross play a part in helping us to forgive? And number 4, is it okay to take time to forgive when the hurt is great? Forgiveness isn't easy, but remember, God shows us that it's necessary for not only our own well-being, but also that of other people. And He will help us to forgive, even if it feels impossible. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together online, and thank you for watching. We love gathering as church, even when we can't be together in person. Remember, all this week we have our holiday club happening with 80 kids from all around Debenham coming along. It is going to be a high energy, fun and a memory-making week. Next Sunday, it will be our holiday club special where the families of the kids attending get to join us and have a barbecue and some fun, and you are invited too. After the service, there'll be a barbecue and a bouncy castle and a chance to hang out and chat. So if there's someone you've been wanting to invite to church for ages and you're not sure how to or when to, next Sunday is a perfect opportunity. There's a barbecue, there's games, and our next instalment of this series is all about how we can love, how we can put on the clothing of love. So why not join us in person or online next week?